right, so I'm also not a tech guy, so I'll do my best up here. And in writing a novel, you end up being the most wasteful person on the stage because I have all of the paper. So let's see. So that's perfect. Okay. All right, so as you said, I'm Will White, and I wrote a novel called Dust and Thunder. It's about 31,000 words long and 125 pages, and it cost me about 11 months of my life. So a little bit of basic info because you haven't read the book yet, so I can't quite discuss the contents or anything, but it is a book about a bunch of skiers who live in the mountains. It's a very vague location, but we'll get into all that later. So one of the most I would like to change slides. That'd be good. There. One of the most common questions that I get asked is, what was the inspiration for this novel? And the very beginning of this, I was sitting in Honors Algebra 1, right in this building up there in John Dobbs' class. And I was sitting there, bored out of my mind, staring out into space, and I had the thought, what if there was a run somewhere, a ski run, covered in snow, that nobody can ski? So I conjured an image in my head sitting there in one of those desks, and that stuck with me forever, I think. That eventually became a short story I wrote called Finnegan's Pass, which about 10 pages, and eventually developed into a novel called Dust and Thunder, which might sound familiar, maybe. And then later, the place where everyone in my novel lives is nameless. It's never given a name in the story. But it's based off of a real place called Taos Ski Valley in New Mexico. And I chose that place because it's very significant to me, and because when I was there once, very early in the morning, I was sitting by a window watching it snow, and if anyone here's ever been in a blizzard, you know there's not a whole lot of thunder in blizzards. But I was sitting there staring out, and the mountain was seemingly rocked by thunder that I don't think I've heard in Oklahoma, much less in the mountains of New Mexico. And when I was watching this thunder rock the mountain back and forth, I looked to my right to see this table that was before covered in dust, but it had been stirred, and the dust was lifted into the air, sort of frozen right there. And so you put those two things together, you get, it's not up there, Dust and Thunder. So that is the secondary inspiration for the novel. Now, the location of this novel is important, as I said. It doesn't just come from the fact that I have half lived in Taos all my life. It also comes from the fact that if you read the book and you think about the characters, throw the characters into both of those places, a Hawaiian beach and an Icelandic storm. That picture is courtesy directly of Mr. Smith, by the way. He found that like this morning or something. If you put my characters in the picture on the bottom right there, it won't make any sense. If I try to write a story about my characters on a beach, it wouldn't work. I don't think I'd get past describing the sand. But they practically lived in that top left picture. And I think that's really important. And it also contributed to the fact that there's a really vague location in Dust and Thunder. Because if it was specific, you would go to that place and look around and try to imagine them there, and it just doesn't work if you know where they are. All right, now, there's some people smiling out there right now because they know who Richard Mantham is. But in my book, he was someone completely different. So Richard Mantham, I'll go back a little bit. Back in February, when IST was just starting up, I had 85 pages of this novel. I scrapped 65, 70 pages of that, which left me with about 17. Richard Mantham was one of the characters who existed solely in those 70 pages, and he is gone. And so the lesson from Richard Mantham is that you absolutely have to kill your characters. He does not actually die in the novel, but I had to get rid of him. I had to literally delete him from the world. And that was one of the most painful things I've ever had to do because I've had his name for a long time and I wanted to use it somewhere. And it was tough to realize that he was never going to be a real influencer. Now, right now is when Mr. Smith has agreed to start passing things out to you guys. Don't worry about it just yet. I will explain it in a little while. So what is a novel? A novel, for me, before I wrote Dust and Thunder, and before I started the process, I was an absolute scatterbrain for a writer. I would write a 250-word story, and then I would forget about it. And if you go look at my Google Drive, like, it's filled. There's like 12 folders filled with like these half stories that aren't completely thought out, and there's definitely no focus. Now, Dust and Thunder trained me to be a far more focused writer. I took what I used to have as like a shotgun of writing, and I took it and I made it into this scalpel of carving a story. And I think that was one of the most powerful things that I learned. And I will keep talking while Mr. Smith is handing things out, because I have to. So, I think I can be quiet for a little bit, though. Yeah. I think most people have them now, so I can start giving instructions. So, everybody take one of these pages. I think they are double-sided. It doesn't really matter. You're not going to read the whole thing. And once you have one, just read a few lines. You know, maybe a short paragraph, a few bits of dialogue, something along those lines. And then think to yourself, what happened right before this whole page? What happened right before I just read? And now think to yourself, what is going to happen next? And then think, what has happened so far in this story and in this person's life to make them do this? And some of you guys don't have characters on your sheet. I know there are scenes without them, but if you do have a sheet with people doing things, think what identity makes them do what they do here. And that's the difference. If you just read, 3 lines out of a page, yeah, that's great. But then you read 3 lines out of a page and you think, there is a complete person behind this. There's a complete group of people and a complete story behind this. And that's the difference between writing what I did, writing really short stories, and writing a complete narrative, a complete story like we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and read something from the novel, because I feel like I have to. So you guys don't need any sort of prior information. This is the prologue, the very first thing you read. Somebody out there probably has that page, actually, so here goes. The air sat upon the snow and roofs in thick, shadowy sheets, weighing heavy on all things. A valley between 2 great peaks rested in the ink of night. A lonely road snuck upward through its middle from one end to the other, and in a window framed by frozen moonlight sat a young man. He stared at the frosted pane before him, feeling for all the world as though something had woken him up. He breathed at the window, his senses telling him to run. He had defeated these senses long ago. It was a moment before he would turn back, climb into bed, and fall asleep that he heard it. But he didn't hear it. He felt it. A moving of the air. It seemed to surge, swell as the sea, and then recede. Fall back into place. The air itself breathed from the window at the boy. He sat there, feeling the air press in on him, let his grip fade, then press again. For a long time he sat there as the starless, cloudless night closed in on him. His eyes were open wide at the window, frozen shut, and covered in an inch of bleak white frost. But there was something there. The wind did not stir the trees, nor did it shake the powerful feeling of the grip of silence around the boy. After a long hour, he brought his hand down from his side and let his finger tap the window. His finger was 1.5 inches from the glass when the howling began. Echoing through the frozen night, it sounded as though some distorted man had been ripped to shreds while he could still scream. Yet its voice seemed a mile from human. This continued for the boy screamed at the window, pure rage. His voice smashed through the night, and the being outside the window seethed in its screams. He felt the air recede from his body and realized in a moment that the creature had fled. Fire rose in his throat. He dove to his left, snatching a pair of black skis and boots, shoving the boots on his feet. With his skis and boots in hand, he faced the window, ran and dove, shoulder first at the glass. With a clunk, the window swung open and the boy fell from the 2nd story into snow below him. He fought his body out of the snow and found himself face to face with an empty, dark cloak floating away. Bathed in darkness, there lay a cliff, bent at its elbow. The boy raised his chin, clad only in a long-sleeved black shirt and plaid fluttering pants. He gripped his teeth, the shape black rushing through the forest. He dove, skis in hand, down the slope. He rolled in the snow, shoving his skis on his feet as he fell. The first ski clipped and he avoided a sharp rock, tumbling. His head faced downhill, panic rising in his stomach as he caught speed. With all his might, he flung his legs around. With his feet ahead of him, the second ski clicked and he snatched control from the snow. His body darted through the snow straight down. His legs seemed to toss his body about. He rocketed over a boulder, landing on the flats of his skis on soft snow. The shape ahead of him flew, an empty black cloak ripping through the trees down the snowy cliffside. Then all of a sudden, the snow flattened. The boy slid in a huge arc around the creature which sat in a clearing under the absent moon. The boy slid on his side, kicking up a cloud of snow into the air into the clearing, then stood, skis on his feet to face the creature. It seemed as though someone had tied a thread to a tattered black cloak and let it dangle there in the vague shape of a man. The surging of air at the boy, pressing on his body, was weaker now. The creature stared at him. He, though, stared back. The boy held his hand out toward the thing without a thought in his head. He snapped his fingers, and from his thumb came a piercing point of white light, throwing rays into the trees, skies, and the creature. And that is that. So I think next is going to be thanks to Ben and Robbie White. Those are my parents out there somewhere in the back. They're wonderful. As well as Sydney Tucker. She could not be here tonight. She's out of country. And Mr. Carter, Mr. Smith, who are both my sponsors. Mr. Carter likes to be pretty humble about his role, though, so don't know why. And then Dr. Hamill is obviously a blessing to all of us, so thank you guys very much for coming. One more thing I would like to show you, which will be on display near Turner's house over there, which is beautiful, by the way. So this is the final edited version of Dust and Thunder, which has my markings all in it. So if you'd like to come look at it, you can absolutely go do that. It'll be sitting over there. And if you want a copy of the book, I'm not planning to print them professionally or anything just yet. So if you do want a paper copy, just come talk to me. We'll exchange information, and then I'll give one to you. So thank you guys very much. And let Jacob blow you